We're scary.
It's always the case. Okay, everyone, welcome to, where are my notes? Reclaiming Liberation from Palestine to the World, Letters from a Living Utopia book launch and discussion with Yafa, Leah Kim, and Rabab Abdul Hadi. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. And the Bureau is an independent, all-volunteer queer bookstore that my partner Donnie Jochum and I founded in 2012, and that has been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. Tonight we're being helped out by our volunteer Delaney. Please thank them for their service. And as an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore, we rely on both donations and sales to keep this machinery going. We especially encourage donations if you know you won't be buying any books. So if you're able to support us by buying books, that's great. Whatever way you're able to, we appreciate it. So I'm going to pass a bag. There's some change in here. There's also a QR code if you'd like to give through Venmo. And anyone watching online, if you'd like to make a donation through Venmo, you can do that at BGSQD is the handle. I'll pass this around. So the bookstore, the Bureau, has regular hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we often stay open later when we have events such as this. And you can find out about our upcoming events on our website, which is bgsqd.com. And if you're not already on our newsletter, you can sign up for that at the back of the room or on the website, again, bgsqd.com. And you'll get a newsletter every other Monday about our upcoming events. So before I introduce our guests, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community House, founded in 1969 and located here in Manhattan. Donating to the American Indian Community House is one way for settlers and non-Native people to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at aich.org. The Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a fundamental part of our collective queer liberation, and we strongly encourage you to take one of our free zines that are by the register about why we feel it is important for queer people to speak out in solidarity with Palestinians, although I think I'm preaching to the choir at this particular event and hopefully at most of our events. But we do encourage you to take one of these, share them with others. They are free. And with that, I'm going to read ever so quickly the bios of our guests, and then we're going to jump on into it. So Mix Yafa is a disabled, autistic, trans, queer Muslim, and indigenous Palestinian culture worker and organizer. The author of Blood Orange, Whispers Beneath the Orange Grove, and Desecrated Poppies, Yafa is also editor of Inara, Light of Utopia, and executive director of the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity. Rabab Abdul Hadi, founding director, senior scholar of Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program at SFSU, is co-founding editorial board member of Islamophobia Studies Journal, lead editor of book volumes and author of over 80 articles and book chapters in 7 languages. She received her PhD from Yale University and scholarly awards and community honors, including Sterling Fellowship, New Century Scholarship, Best Nonfiction Book Award, and American Association of University Professors, National Women's Studies Association. She is compiling critical oral histories of Palestinian activism and editing an anthology on teaching Palestine and roundtables on Black liberation, abolition, and reparations, and Whose Narrative? Gender, Justice, and Palestine. Leah Kim is a mental health advocate and host of the Voices on the Side podcast. She writes about motherhood and mental health on her blog on motherhood.com. She has been featured in Women's Health, Shape, Garage, and Matches Fashion, and sits on and on sites such as mother.ly, Medium, and Tiny Buddha. Her writing has appeared in Harper's Bazaar, PT Magazine, Assemblage, Just Breathe, Get the Gloss, Top Sante, is that right? I think so, and Metro UK. Kim is the author From Office Hell to Yoga Heaven, Jumpstart Your Career as a Yoga Instructor. She was Nike's first ever yoga athlete and spent over a decade as Nike's global yoga ambassador. We'll have to talk later. This project is secretly funded by Nike. Which is to say my partner works full-time for Nike, and that's how we're able to do this. Leah is the author of Mom Unfiltered, coming out April 2026. Leah lives in Brooklyn, New York. Please give them all a very warm welcome. And feel free to take that out of the rest.
Oh my gosh, that's very embarrassing. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. Wow. Welcome to New York.
Thank you.
Welcome home to New York. And welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here to celebrate the book launch of Yafa's, what number book is this? 45th?
True.
This year?
I should know.
But yes, Letters from the Living Utopia. 7?
No.
Might be 8.
8.
Yeah. Just a
No,
prolific.
7.
Well, if it's not 8, then I don't want to talk to you. But no, we're here to celebrate and to keep digging deeper into this conversation around living utopia and building liberation and how all of our liberations are intertwined. And Rabab, it's really nice to meet you this evening, and hearing your introduction was quite like staggering. Like, wow, you can just talk about one piece of your life and it would be immensely inspiring, I'm sure. But where should we start? I mean, how did you meet, the two of you?
Well, I think we were invited to, Yafa was remembering earlier, we were invited to on a panel online that around the whole question of queer liberation, the way in which Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians are constructed as excessively homophobic, and how we need to speak about that, speak about imperialism, speak about Zionism. The genocide had already started, so we were talking about that, and I didn't know Yafa. Partly because I'm not really a very big knowledgeable person about poetry. It's not my area, and a lot of the young people's activism. I mean, just to say, there is a generational issue, and so it was such a pleasure to. And then Yafa started reading from the Art del Portugal, and I talk about the land of oranges. Oh, it was so moving, and I didn't really want to speak afterwards. I just wanted to listen and sit with it. It was so moving to me, and then afterwards we found out that we actually are related. And and then people say in Palestine, فصلت العيلة, like it designed the family, dissected the family. There are a lot of people who do it, and then I usually ask my brothers, do you know how we related to this and this? And they say, okay. My father, when he was alive, would say, we are related to this, and the old man. My mom will say, she's not from Nablus, it's from another. She will say, oh, this is how we're related, the grandmother. And my grandmother was from Nablus as well. So they figured it out. I don't know the young people. They say, Taxis we don't know young people. But Yafa figured it out, actually figured it out from the way back in Jenin, when we were, wow, and my brothers learned when we saw that. So I will stop at that, and Yafa can continue, yeah.
Yeah, I love that so much. Yeah, basically anyone with like any of our last names, I will message immediately and be like, we're related. I don't know how, but you're cool, so we're related. We must be related. We will find this. I think it's really cool though that even though we've lost so much of that connection over the years, of that you can still ask people within families and we will trace it back. And so we had no idea about each other's existence until that panel, right?
Your ancestors brought you together.
It was the best part of the panel. It's what I remember of the panel. The panel was great, but that's what I remember. And then stayed in contact after, and so similarly, anything that Rabab says, I'm like, yeah, I don't need to talk. I'm just gonna sit back, let Rabab talk. I just want to listen. And I think for me in particular, it's like, I feel like within so many of our families as Palestinians, and I feel like a lot of other people relate to this, because of the violence that we've endured, the levels of genocide, the displacements, how our families have had to be torn apart and moved all around the world and separated over generations, that for a lot of us, or at least for me, right, growing up, I didn't grow up with family. I didn't grow up knowing my mom's cousins, and my mom doesn't even know her cousins to an extent, right? Just the displacement between so many different countries, so many different spaces. And then also the violence, right? Of like my mom's, all of her uncles were killed by the British and then one by the Zionists pre-1948. And so to be on a panel years and years and years and years later, like decades post all of that, right? And to reconnect with a family member, right? Where I've never had access to that. And in particular of like different generations, like that's huge, right? Because most of the Palestinians I know are going to be around my age, right? And we are constantly told that our people will never accept everything that we are. And even though we know that's false and we see it as false every single day, it still feels so liberatory to be in a space where actually we get to experience that, right? Especially from my mom's side of the family, which is how we're related, I didn't know my grandparents in that way. My grandmother died in 1994 when I was 2 years old. My grandfather died a little bit later, but we never lived near each other. And so I've never had a conversation with him, even though he died in 2013. For the last like 10 years of his life, he wasn't conscious enough to be able to have a conversation. And so to then be able to still have conversations across all these borders, right? All these generations, to me, it just proves of like liberation is not even just possible, it's so easy, right? If we actually just do it. And so it was one of the greatest pleasures of my life to meet you about 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago.
When we think about just how heartbreaking and just impossible to articulate just the insanity of the last 2 years, and yet the relationships that we have all kind of found and cultivated. And you said earlier something about you want to only talk with people who have souls, who have hearts, right? And that becoming so clear. I am from a really different background because I not only am I not Palestinian, but I knew nothing about Palestinian until October 8th, 2023, when I woke up and was answering text messages and seeing all the social media and just being like, what's happening? And it was, everyone says Palestinian is a litmus test, and I fully understand what that means, because understanding what has been happening in Palestine and continues to happen is understanding what is the most important work that we need to do as humans collectively. And it is actually, I don't want to say I don't want to silver lining it, but I feel like it's necessary to validate that it is such a blessing to be in the space together, you know, whatever it is that brought us here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reflecting on how the two of us met, right? And we just connected online, but then I still remember when we recorded the podcast, because Leah has this fabulous podcast. And I believe it was like the day after my aunt had died, in May, right? So just a few months ago. And that was the first of many deaths in the family. For some weird reason, between May and, December? And November, no family member has died as far as I know in December yet. But up until November, there's been so many losses, right? And I still remember that conversation where you were like, oh, like we can postpone. And I was like, but this is the only way I know how to honor my people, right? This is the only way I know how to show up. And re-listening to it months and months later, right, after even more loss, I was thinking about like how profound that conversation was, and us talking about grief, and in particular how death politics influences utopia building and what living utopia would actually look like, especially considering that death is normal, death happens, right? But the circumstances around it aren't necessarily normal, right? Aren't the things that aren't natural in those ways. And so we're mourning the possibilities that were lost to us due to oppression versus mourning just the loss of a life, because all humans will die, right? We're meant to die. But the complexity of that, and it was beautiful that we were able to get into that conversation and share about like parenthood and just all the things. It was a beautiful podcast. If y'all have not listened to it, definitely listen to it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite episodes. But yes, death is part of life. And I think the way we in the so-called West fear death, run away from death, try to beat death, you know. I read something about there are people who are cryogenically frozen. I thought that was fake. I didn't know that. I thought that was just like storylines in Futurama or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's like, I read something about, I don't know, I can't remember the number, but hundreds of people are cryogenically frozen. You know, there's this like wanting to run away and not face it. And in doing that, you are missing out on living utopia. And we've had to really face what grief is, what like an unjust death is. We talked about this, right? Like death is normal, but that doesn't mean all deaths are just or right. And figuring out how we continue to process this. And never before have I been faced with so much death, not necessarily in my personal, you know, family, but just in my global family. And you are a death doula. That's one of your many, in addition to author, poet, activist, organizer, you're a death doula. And it seems like it would be counterintuitive that you talk so much about life. But that's just me coming from like the Western mind, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of why I embrace this work, right? And for me, it was interesting getting into death work, and so I'm both a death doula and a birthing doula. And I felt, and it wasn't even like, I made a decision at some point in time where I'm like, I'm gonna be a death worker, and I'm gonna be a birthing worker, and I'm gonna be a mental health specialist, and I'm gonna be an engineer, and I'm gonna be a writer, and I'm gonna be a nonprofit person. It literally is just like, I feel like for so many of us, we do what we need to in the moments that we need to, right? We do whatever is strategic. We move, our entire lives pivot to meet the moments that are happening versus that it's that we're planning our life and then we expect the moment to meet us somewhere. And death has been something that's always surrounded my family. It's always surrounded, like most of us as Palestinians would probably relate to that, where we've always known death. Death is not something that like was this weird thing that just randomly happened occasionally or something. It just, even as a child, it was surrounding us, right? And witnessing how my family compared to like predominantly like global north families, where we never talked about death like it's a bad thing, right? No one, like even with the elders in my family, it wasn't like if my grandparents were like, I think I'm ready to die, it wasn't like everyone was like, oh my God, no, girl, you have to stay here forever. You're not allowed to die whatsoever, which is something I've seen in a lot of other families. But it was always just like, you know, when it's someone's time, it's someone's time. but always being able to differentiate, what does it look like to live in a liberated world? What would death actually look like versus like, what does it actually look like today? The vast majority of us, when we die in this world, usually there's some kind of injustice, right? Even when we call it natural causes, usually there is some kind of medical malpractice happening, some kind of like community failure, some kind of thing happening that is impacting how we are. But for me, it's always just been normal. It's just always been a part of it, and I've always had to view it that way, because when I had to move into this work, it was specifically supporting trans unaccompanied minors from Syria back in about like 2012, 2013, 2014, right? And so it was all these children who had just lost their entire families, right? And they're trans, right? And they're coming into a system where it's entirely white social workers, many of whom were also incredibly Islamophobic in the process, and keeping them away from their communities because they're like, no, you're trans and so they're gonna kill you. Like literally would say things like that to a 12-year-old child, right? And witnessing that and being like, yeah, no, like that doesn't work. And that moved me more into mental health, more into death work, because a lot of practitioners out here would come to me and be like, we need you to check in with this child because they're not talking about their family dying, and we want them to talk about it for some reason. And I'll go and hang out with these kids, and afterwards whether it's a social worker, whether it's a psychiatrist, whoever would like come to me after and be like, oh my God, what do you talk about? And I was like, we talked about soccer. And they're like, what do you mean you talked about soccer? I was like, yeah, we talked about soccer. Their favorite teams in like the European League. We talked about different players. And they're like, oh, like, do you not know what you're doing? I'm like, no, do you not know what you're doing? You cannot force a 12 and 14-year-old to talk about the worst moments of their lives. We just create space for people. And so witnessing that giant gap that existed of how few spaces we get where we can just be and talk and exist. And that ultimately always moved me towards life, right? Because to me, I'm not, and this is what really this book is about and a lot of my other work, y'all, I'm not here for just a utopic destination in another lifetime, in somebody else's lifetime, far, 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 far away. Like, I'm here for us embracing one another today, right now, right? If everyone here hates everyone here, then I'm like, what are we doing, right? To me, it doesn't work. For me, embracing death means that we're embracing the entire spiral of life. And that includes that, actually, we can be liberated in this moment in time as we do the work to build a liberated world. Those are two very different things. And I'm just fortunate that I've been able to get into that work at such an early age, horrifically. And also at the same time, always grateful for how the universe has moved me into being able to do this work and to acknowledge those things and be able to embrace that, yeah, we get to live a better world now.
Yeah.
And if we don't live a better world now, we don't have the blueprint to actually build a liberated world. And I think in at least a lot of my circles, as I became an adult, as I started doing this work on larger scales and things like that, that has been missing from so many different spaces, right? Where it's like, the purpose is the destination. And I'm like, well, if we get to the destination, we all hate each other today. Like, why would we stay in that destination? How will we actually even get there? And especially for me, of like, as someone who is always so close to death, even on a personal level, I'm like, I want us liberated right now.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that like full liberation for the entire planet is going to happen next week or the next year or whatever it is. But we get to be part of that blueprint along the way for somebody someday to live in that liberated world.
I think there was a realignment or rewiring even when we spoke, that was several months ago, and I was coming out of everyone just talking about dystopia. We're living in dystopia, everything sucks. And you kept saying utopia, right? I mean, it's literally built into your handle as well, in addition to in your book title, but, and just hearing that it was like, oh, right, that's what we're doing here. We're not just here to be in despair and just burnt out and losing hope. No, we are building and co-creating through relationships, through art and all of these things. And I've realized once I shifted my own personal kind of filter to allow for that, actually, not only do I feel stronger, but I'm able to do more. I'm able to reach more people. I'm able to, I think just like receive more also. And it has not disconnected me from the work, you know? And I think about like, for me, it's like I said, 2 years now, if we're just talking about Palestine, it's been in my consciousness. For you, it's been a lot longer than 2 years.
Yes.
And so, you know, if I don't know if you hear some people talking about burning out or all these things. And so what is your advice in that way?
Okay, yeah, I want to say, I don't want to go back to death, actually talk a little about that in things that I'm reflecting on as Yafa is speaking. I don't really know what burnout means. And I'm going to say, actually when I moved to San Francisco, when everybody started talking about self-care, that bugged the hell out of me. Because on one hand, I work very hard and I've been subjected to a lot of terrible things aside from being exiled and being away from family, which is really, really hard. You have to go through it to understand what it means when the very idea of actually just missing a memory can make you crumble. So you try not to. Actually, like, that's very, very difficult to just be able to resist because it will make you fall apart, right? And I'll say that in a minute. But then people just say, you need to take care of yourself. Your most important thing is your health. After they ask me about what's going on, these death threats, these attacks, and so on and so on. Most important thing is to take care of your health. And I said, yeah, come and take my place.
Right.
If you come and take my place and you actually jump in and do that, and actually it's just not my place. We need more people to do more things. So I will, but it's not, we can't always afford. I'm not saying that people should not, they could get burned. If you do too much one day and we always think of it as this is a long protracted struggle. This is not a struggle that's going to be happening in one day and then you get disappointed tomorrow because liberation didn't happen. It's not going to be delivered to you. It's not something that you pay for and tomorrow you're going to get it at the cash register. That's not the way life works. It is a very, very long, there is so much things that are needed for liberation. And you mentioned Palestine, and I wanted to actually add and say, it's not because Palestine is exceptional, but because Palestine, one is, I would say, a couple of things. Palestinian struggle itself has qualitatively changed so many times over the years that it did become for the Palestinians themselves as a signifier of injustice for all. So Palestinians do not only think of their own struggle. And I think this is so important, that no longer that we think only that we are the exception, we are the ones who are the special, nobody else matters. So there is this empathy and humanity and recognition of other people, and recognition that justice for us is justice for all. That's really important for the Palestinian people, instead of only thinking of us, and what the world owes us. And for the rest of the world too, when people think of Palestine, yes, Palestine now is a signifier, because also of the ways in which the people, the enemies of the Palestinians, want to eliminate them. They want to erase us. Actually, basically, we won't exist. So I think in that sense, it's really a very important development, very qualitative change, I think, that has altered a lot of things, many, many years, miles of years to come. I think that's one thing. The other thing is yes, we have a long protracted, so for people who are very, very enthusiastic, especially they're coming into the struggle today and want everything to happen yesterday and get disappointed. And it's like, we did all of this stuff, why didn't this happen? Yeah, it's not everything happened the way we wanted, and there is so many forces outside, we're doing everything, everybody is doing, who believes in us, but there are people who have interests, who have bigger interests. It's not necessarily personal, even though it affects us personally. It's not personal. They need to collect the money, the weapons, the power. The 1% have to stay the 1%. So it is, aside from the nastiness and the hate and the viciousness and all of this stuff, this is also interest. So it's not just convincing another person.
Yeah.
But for that, it will take a lot. Okay. So I think that's why I said, and I will go again and add one word, individual self-care. Doesn't work. We do need community self-care. So we need to make sure that we are working with other people and see somebody is getting really, really depressed, over-depressed. I mean, the stuff we see every single day. How can you not get depressed? How can you not get completely destroyed and continue functioning? I mean, I've been struggling for such a long time, and I have to tell you, there are days that I am so destroyed. I don't know what to do. I'm just frozen. And then I have to rest, try to switch my mind, talk to somebody, draw energy if somebody else was actually doing better than me and so on, and get on, continue going. And I think that happens in a collective space, in a collective environment, in building a different way of thinking. Where are we? We are in exile, we're not home, we are not surrounded by so we seek community. We seek community. Where are they? You look for cousins, you look for family, you look for other people and so on, draw strength from them. So I think that's we just can't afford. And sometimes it is hard, but sometimes people really talk to you and give you support and give you the love and so on, so you can continue going. So I don't think we can, as a community, we can afford to get hurt. As individuals, possibly, but then that's the presence of the community to give the love and the support. So I think that's for me, it's sort of sometimes you get sick, by the way. Sometimes even if you don't get depressed mentally, your body tells you that you are so sick you can't function anymore. And the sickness gets worse and worse and worse until you are dumped in bed. You can't do anything about it. I mean, there are different ways in which the environment affects you. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't think the solutions are individual. I think they are collective, and we all collectively must come together and work. If we believe in the same project, we don't. People don't care, right? So I think that's one thing about dystopia and all of this. I think the other thing I just wanted to talk about death. Yeah, of course, it's a normal part of life, whatever normal means. I always stuck when people say normal, because it's normalizing oppression, it's normalizing anything. I don't want to see anything as a status quo, as normal, business as usual. So I'm constantly questioning it. I want to turn any stone and think about it. Because anybody who says to me, oh, this is normal, this is in Arabic, adi. No, the other thing is adi. Okay, why is it adi? So especially because of the conditions that are imposed upon us. But I do understand that some people pass after an old age or a sickness or something. But when you see the death that is happening today, it's unreal. I mean, it's unreal. When you see babies dying because the blood froze in their veins, because they could not get blankets. What is this? What kind of a world is this? I mean, how could you not be shocked? And try to explain it to me, try to rationalize it. There is no rationalization. Or when you see one of your relatives die, when you couldn't even make it to the funeral, or you couldn't make it to the receiving condolences, or you couldn't get it to the grave. Not just for us, I mean, it happened to me many times, but think of the prisoners who couldn't even have their parents come visit them in prison, and they died in prison. And there was a prisoner, her daughter died not long ago. They wouldn't even let her go to the grave. I mean, who does that? Why would you do that? Supposing the security is the issue, what security have to do with it? I mean, all of these issues, that's one thing, but also death makes it impossible for people to be, so you can, if you want to say something to them, and it leaves such a huge hole, and then you can't really explain it to other people. I think it is a different angle from what you're talking about, Yafa. It's one thing to say, yeah, of course, people die, and we don't really need to obsess. You live longer, you don't live longer, the youthful look, all of this stuff is, I think it's sort of like commercializing and marketing and creating more things to do something that is not possible. And all these people, where do they get the money, by the way, to freeze themselves? I mean, you have to be able be in a certain income bracket to be able to do this.
Right.
So we need to also, who even gets to do it, and also who's obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And who's got, you die. But I'm talking about like when death is caused specifically in a particular, and it's just you can't explain it. And also when you can even go visit the grave. I mean, that's like, and where all you can even bury. Talking about the bodies, the Palestinians whose bodies are captured on purpose by the Israeli government that refuses to let them go, refuses to actually now have a law that we are not going to hand over the bodies of martyrs to their families to bury them. I mean, so all of these things that surround, they're all around death politics. Maybe cause it necropolitics. This is another aspect of it. That is, none of it is normal. So, if you want to talk about normal, and so I do remember, for example, like when my dad passed, I would say to people, this is what Israelis did to him at the bridge. This is what they delayed us, they did this. And they say, what did he do? Did nothing. 75-year-old Palestinian man dying of cancer, and he really wants to get home. So when he dies, he will be buried near his family. That's it.
Where was that?
That was in 2002 and 2001. I took him to Palestine, and it was under very difficult conditions of very stringent curfew. And the ambulance was stopped several times and searched, and we stopped 10 hours at the bridge in the heat, even though we had certification. My mom was also disabled, and I was just with them. It was such a difficult period, and I stopped saying to people here in the US that he passed. But I only said to people who are friends who could understand. But anybody who asked me, what did he do? Honestly, I wanted to slap their faces or something. I was so angry, and I felt so insulted, and I felt the whole situation so cheapened. I couldn't even talk about it. I didn't even want to share this sadness and pain that will not only break me, but also make me angry at the humanity. So, and we face that all the time. So you want to maintain that, even the feeling of sadness for the people, your community. And your community is not only your family. Your kin is extended, is chosen too. Your people you're working with and so on, they understand what's going on, they want to know more. But other people, it's impossible. I mean, this is all the questioning again and again and again. And sometimes with good intentions, but that's not the way it falls on you.
Is this mostly Americans that are responding in this way?
Yeah. There's definitely people from, I would say, US.
Yeah.
Mostly, and just totally without understanding. And I would just add another thing is that, like what all sorts of things that, how do families respond? You talked about the kids, but do these social workers have a recipe? What they're supposed to do? You ask the first question, the second question, the third question, but don't you understand that different communities have different things to deal with, different ways, and maybe your whole social science of psychiatry doesn't really work. Maybe it needs to be rethought, I thought about differently, and so on. So there are different ways of, and also the whole thing, bias against Palestine.
Yeah.
The whole experiences, anything you will need to say. At one point, I remember that I actually even had to justify, why is it that I love the male members of my family? Because if I were a true feminist, I would hate all men, right? I mean, really, it's to even explain how can it, because it's supposed to be eternal, right? And it's not necessarily, it's kind of like people say, oh yeah, everybody gets killed there. I said, well, I didn't get killed. My neighbor didn't get killed, my cousin didn't get, oh really, yes, really, it's in the history. And it's and it's also questioned all the time. It's not only we didn't know, so now you know. Let's move on. Knowing doesn't allow you to move on more. And so you find comfort in talking to the people who understand, they don't know. You didn't know, so you get to know more. It's okay that you didn't know, you'll know more, because we don't know about everything around the world. It's okay not to know, but when you know, you're supposed to at least react, not continue question. One of the problems that we face constantly is that we even are not allowed to feel. Our feelings are not legitimized. Thus, we don't share our feelings with other people because we don't want the offense of being humiliated to have to explain our feelings. So we're not sharing our feelings. We share with each other.
Yeah.
Because we just need to look at each other, and we know what it is. But I know what it is when Yafa finds that we're cousins. We're cousins. That's I think I'm gonna stop.
No.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna stop.
We're like, no, don't stop, keep going. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, because
I mean, like I said earlier, I just want Rabab to talk the entire time, forever. Yeah, I think it's always really fascinating to me around like that last part, right, where when people are yearning for knowledge, but they're never satisfied also with it, and so it's like there's a difference between people who ask questions for the sake of really understanding, and specifically understanding how do they show up better, versus people who ask a lot of questions specifically to prove you wrong. And the reality though is that, and I feel like all three of us have had to deal with this, and I know a lot of you here have had to deal with this, where we are forced into positions where we have to represent entire groups of people across hundreds and thousands of years, and to justify every single action and every single decision, and then you're also blamed if you are ever wrong. And it's like, I have my experience, Rabab has her experience, Leah has her experience, everyone, like, we've had to be experts on so much around our oppression.
Yeah.
And also, we'll never know everything, right? And so, for me personally, a lot of people who know me know this, I don't engage in conversations with just anyone. I will have conversations with people if they're in the work. Otherwise, I make it accessible for people to find information. Book number 7, right? Like, I'm like, go read books, go listen to an audiobook. Google it, right? Like, I'm like, I've done enough podcasts.
Yeah.
I go on my Instagram, right? Like, go wherever. I've made it so accessible for you to access my knowledge in that way. But to have actual conversation with me, you have to earn that, right? And there's a payment for that, right? And that payment is work, is that labor for liberation, not just for my people, not just for our people, but literally for every single group of people. And often we talk about like Palestine as like the litmus test, and yes, 100%, and also that's the beginning, right? It's a litmus test to get through a door. It doesn't end there. Because if you just take any single form of oppression and you end the conversation at the start and end of that one form of oppression, we'll never get there. Because by design, systems of oppression are meant to be contradictory. They're meant to turn us against one another. But if we can't even have a beginning, how are we actually going to be on this journey? And I love that you talked about the collective, right? And how like, out here, there's this I, the I is so powerful, right? That individualism. And whether we're talking about this work, whether we're talking about anything else, yeah, people are like, yeah, you need self-care and you need self-actualization, you need all of those. And actually in one of the letters in the book, because in the book, the way that it's framed, so I want to say it's like 15 different letters, but the entire narrative is an ecosystem of collectivism. And in particular, I very specifically did it in a way where the letters aren't just to people. It's not just like there's a letter to my mom, for example. There's a letter to my nibblings. There's a letter to one of my sisters. There's a letter to some best friends. But there's also a letter to liberation, to death, to my language, right? To home, to Yafa itself, right? Like the city itself versus the inner child, right, within me. And to your point, right, of like, we draw energy from everything around us, right? And when we define our collective as just a few people, we're not going to be able to carry this. This is a lot. Like 5 people cannot carry genocide. But when we're connected to land, to spirit, to like literally there's a Gemini full moon, and we were talking about this earlier where in the book I have dates that include astrological signs, because I want us tapping into all kinds of energies, because it's not just about us. It's not about a single individual or even us in this room or online or just the people that we know. It's actually the opposite. To me, it's all about all the people that we will never know, about all the places we will never go to, about all the stories that we will never know, about all the stars we will never name, about so much more than just everything that we are. And in the book, I talk a lot about language and etymology of language, and in particular, I break things down both in English and in Arabic in a lot of ways, because those are the languages I'm fluent in. And in particular, with the self-actualization piece, I break that down because if you think of self-actualization, if you define it within individualism, we're talking about the self as in an I. But if you define it within collectivism, the self is only defined by the collective. The self is never defined by an individual. And so I can never actually self-actualize without a collective, without so much more than just myself. But if the focus is just on Yafa, right, or Leah or Rabab or whoever, we don't actually move forward, right? We don't actually get there, or as we try to get there, it's just not pleasant, because then you're carrying genocide on your own. You're carrying, those children that are being killed in horrific ways. And a single one of those deaths, for most of us, is enough. Like, that's such a heavy burden. And yet we are tasked to still build a liberated world, right? And collectively, holding things with the land, with spirit, with the Gemini full moon, with other people, with other concepts. Actually, we're meant to carry the universe. Not even a single genocide, not a single death. We can carry everything that has ever existed. And the book goes into a lot of that. And when I do trainings, because these days, a lot of my work, for some weird reason, has just become a lot of trainings. And I specifically will focus on like foundation building for organizers. Of like, how do you actually do this for the next 20 years? Because like you said, this doesn't end on Tuesday. Like, that would be so cute. I would love it if it ended on Tuesday, right? Like, but it's not, right? Like, we're here for our entire lives.
No deadline.
There's no deadline. And even when we're there, even when we're in a liberated world, and this is a lot of what the book also goes into, even when in a liberated world is when the work actually begins. Because now we actually get to live liberated, right? We actually get to be in liberated space. And I think a lot of places have this idea of liberation as this destination, and it ends, right? Of like, we're going to overthrow white supremacy, we're ending empire, and then that's it, right? Like, it's like, okay, final page, right? Everyone lives happily ever after, and we close the book. And it's like, no, like, we still need to heal. We still need to connect. We need to still thrive with one another. We still get to be in service to one another. We get to be in community. But now we no longer have the barriers that are killing us in the process to get to that destiny, to get to those places that we are trying to move towards.
I think that also the ways the way you're describing it is that the struggle itself, the movement itself, should not be thought of as sort of like a job, a task you need to do and come back on, and a terrible task. Because there are ways, no really, I mean, there are ways
100%.
to kind of like be fun.
Yeah.
You know, be fun, kind of like engage with each other, work with each other. So it's not something that we check at the door and then we leave, like put the, the slip. It's something that is ongoing. That's why it's always ongoing. So we are engaging in a moment of struggle here. We're talking with each other. We're engaging our minds with each other. All of it. There is no reason to make it miserable. I mean, there are things are imposed upon us, so they are miserable. I'm not saying all of it is, but I think when you talk about the utopian, it is, look, we're here. Look, we're here and where we were. So this is another thing to look. Oh, it's over 100 years that the Palestinians have survived. Over 100 years that there have been attempts to erase the Palestinian people completely. They're still here. They're still here, and the cost is high, but the cost of freedom is always high. And we don't want it, and we want to shorten it. But I'm saying also the struggle itself does not have to be like seen as if we are like having, there are some parts of it that are really rough and you have to do them. But I'm saying in this sense, I don't really see my engagement in the struggle as something that's forced upon me. If I am not involved, I don't really know what I'm going to do with myself, honestly. But there are moments when you take a break, and like Emma Goldman said that if I can't have fun in your dance in your revolution, I don't want any part in it. We want to dance. We want to dance because we are fighting to have a different world. We are fighting to have for ourselves, for our children, for everybody. So I think when people feel that they are guilty or they are being forced or something, I find that very, very troubling. It's like if you feel if such a burden, Allah يسهل عليكم, يعني go via Maldives in Arabic. God with you, God with you. It's okay. There are a lot of other people who are going to struggle, and it's kind of like telling the whole world you owe me. It's okay, you're one person. But chill, and we are, the rest of us will work together, come together, and make it happen. And I definitely, I don't really think it's utopia. I think it's revolutionary optimism. And I'm saying in utopia in the sense that if utopia is the good thing we're going to arrive to, okay. If utopia is meant that it cannot be achieved, I don't agree. And I don't think that's what you mean.
No.
Yeah, it's not, because we at one point, people are not, and I know like they're not masochists. People don't want to hurt themselves. People want to have a better life. They want to breathe, they want to eat, they want their children to smile, to run and play. And you see every single time there is a ceasefire, all these kids get out on the street and start to break dancing. I'm like, where do you learn all of this stuff? I mean, like, it's honestly like, well, all of them coming in and they start dancing. Look, I don't know how to do this, but it's amazing, and it can all be staged. I mean, Israel can say, no, it can't be staged, because then on the camera they all start dancing. But it's incredible, and it shows the love of, and I really like the fact that it shows the love of life, and it shows that our children are not being taught when they are locked down, being taught to be angry, to hate, and so on. And every single time you have them before the camera, they quote this, and they sing, and they speak to the word, and I love the fact that this is how they are being taught, and they are not absorbing the hate and nastiness and ugliness that is coming from genocide against them. And I'm not saying that you turn the other cheek, because you have to defend yourself. But there is all these issues that are not something like simple or foofy or fluffy stuff or something. It's actually very real. It's very material that allows us to live, allow us to live, to love, and also at the same time to also be sad. To also be sad, to break sometimes, to crumble sometimes. I have to tell you, the most recent period, one of the things that's hitting me the most is we have the olive trees near Jenin. Abdel Hadi family has. Every year, in the past, after my parents passed, they used to give us, my brother says to me, how much oil do you want? Olive oil. And I really like it at the beginning because it burns. It's like, it has this taste that it burns. I said, don't sell, just send them to me. Okay, ship them. And last year, my younger brother said, Rabab, you don't have new olive oil. I said, no. He said, I'm going to ship you. So he shipped incredible olive oil and olives. I usually give to our friends like little bit sample, not all our friends. Only the people who deserve to taste olive oil from me.
I'm sending you my address.
Yeah, seriously, because olive oil and embroidery and so on, I don't give to everybody. I give only to people who deserve to have it. So, but this year, my brother says to me and my sister, I'm sorry, there is no olives coming from Jenin area. I'm going to look and see if there is anything from Bethlehem area. And until now, this is a dagger in my heart. This is the thing that every time I see something on TV, like the olives, how could there be not olive in Jenin? And then I see like the trees being burned, because it takes 7 years for each olive tree to carry fruit. And like, said, how could there be Palestine without olive trees? How could there be not olives? I mean, this is something. This is the trying attempt to destroy life. So you know, you'll understand when I say something like this. It's just,
Yeah.
or they couldn't make a headstone for somebody. They could not build a headstone, or they could not bury somebody. There are certain things, I'm not even talking about the big, because we know the bigger issues and what's happening, we can discuss. But things like this, and you know, you really have, it hits you like that. How can you even, you have to have the courage, you have to have the collective, you have to have the love around you. And you have to have the humanity to allow you to actually even have the luxury to feel the sadness and think about it, and think about what does it mean, and how can we even transport that with people, and have enough support and solidarity from the people around us to be able to understand what, and let us sit with it a little bit before we go on to more political analysis, and which is necessary as well, but just bear with me a little bit in order for me to express this, and then we'll go to the next point, you know.
I think it's exactly what you were saying about we hold the entire universe, the land, the stars we can't name, and the olive trees that were for no reason ruined, burned. It just proves that connection that we have to land. I think you both talk a lot about community and about the need to care, to get the information, but then to do the work, to care enough then to do the work. And I think that is a missing piece that I find within this country. And I think it comes from the individualism that we are, you know, really intensely brainwashed with. American dream and be the best and win and all of these things. And I think, so, you know, a couple years ago, I think there was like this wave of people like me that didn't know, that got the information, and it changed us forever. You know, it changed every cell in our beings, and we understand that all our struggles are connected, and it's a lifelong commitment. I think we're past that moment now, right? It's not like about what post can I make, or what information can I give, what historical war can I tell you about to get you to care. I think I feel kind of stuck because everyone knows now. But there's some disconnect, some dissonance that makes people not commit, not see that it's their struggle. I don't know, I just wonder about that a lot.
Yeah, I think I think it really has to do with Palestine, specifically in this sense, because there has never been ever in the US or any of the European countries a lobby for apartheid. We never have people here actually saying that apartheid is a good thing, never. So we have to contend with very, very strong power, the Zionist movement that's defending Israel, that actually claims legitimacy and humanity. It is one of the hardest things, and hiding behind a tragedy and saying never again, but not never again for everybody. I mean, it is one of the hardest things to face a people, and this is one of the things that kind of like really undermines the justice for the Palestinians. And you have to explain level by level. I mean, this is where a lot of the disconnect happens. You start talking about it, and then people get stuck and say, "What about?" I'm like, this is not about the Jews. This is not about the Jewish people. There are a lot of anti-Zionist Jewish people who are very much with the Project for the Liberation of Palestine, and they are part and parcel of it. They're not outside of it. Zionism is very different than that. Don't get deluded by this. But the disconnect, and then there is years and years and years of this misinformation, miseducation. There are ways in which everybody in the US studied this in high school. How many people have seen Exodus? How many people have in their minds that Palestinians are savage, backward, nasty people, bloodthirsty terrorists? How many people have? How many times you have to explain this? For me, every single time, everybody, oh, you are such a courageous Palestinian. I said, I'm not the only one. You know, we are so many of us. I came out of a generation. I am a result of a generation. I am not the only unique Palestinian. There are so many people who say, oh my God, did you see this queer Palestinian? Yeah. Well, so, I mean, this is this whole thing of exceptionalizing, and I'm not, by the way, saying everything is wonderful. No, but it's like all other societies. Why do you hold the Palestinian society to a higher standard than anybody else? Why? I mean, this is part of the issue. So I think this is one of the hardest, I think, for us to deal with the disconnect. But the thing is, the disconnect is getting much smaller. You're seeing people everywhere, across, and I see it, and I'm like shocked. I'm shocked in a pleasant way that there are so many. They're not at the level where we can sit and have this kind of. No, honestly, because it will be painful for us.
Yeah.
It will be because then somebody, not for intimate conversations, because it's, and by the way, it's not just for the Palestinian people. For any community that's struggling, there are people who you can actually talk freely and say whatever you want to, and there are some people you can't. There has to be like gatekeeping even in your mind. You have to have that, because if you just pour everything out, you're going to get crushed. It will happen in every single struggle and every single feeling. So this whole like trusting.
Do you resent that though? Do you resent that it has to be that way?
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want to like slap someone.
Yeah, but I mean, this is why I really like to teach online, because this will teach you to think and respond and calm down and give a nice response without.
You can go camera off for a minute and like.
Yeah. I mean, it's also better for teaching, but I think, this is the word it is. It's like, think what people say every single day about indigenous people. Every single day, okay? Every single day they make comments that are racist. Every single day make homophobic, sexist. Every single day, the behavior. Every single day it happens. So the Palestinian stuff, okay, we see it more, of course, because there is in this country the mindset, Islamophobic, racist, anti-Palestinian, pro-Zionist, and so on. But there is things that are changing, and I think we have to recognize that there is a very big change, and that gives us a lot of hope, that people are changing and becoming much more understanding of what's going on. Unfortunately, the price is so much blood that has been spilled, but there is a change, and I think for that, we as Palestinians, we also all the time need to bring in the struggle of other people that folks forget about. So like post 9/11, 2001, everybody started talking about Arabs and Muslims, but there is still racial profiling, there is still ethnic profiling, there is still racism, there is still all sorts of oppression in the United States. They didn't finish. Don't just focus on one thing and forget about everything else, and we are on the pedestal. I think it's very problematic. And then I have to say, just to be clear about our community, some of our folks in our community, they love it. They swallow it and they go with it, and yes, but it's not true. It is not true. We also need to be humble, and we also need to understand that this is something that also applies to other folks as well, and that we are part of this, the humanity. And I'm not talking about it in the UN, like language, fluffy language. I'm talking about it in really that it is affect us, and what happens to other people affect us, and what happens to us affects other people.
Yeah, 100% to everything. Oh my God. I think, like, I kind of mentioned this before, right? And I've been doing this work for a while, obviously not as long as you. And, I've done it in Syria when the Syrian revolution was starting, right? That's where I kind of became an adult. I did it across at least like 24 countries, which I think is where like my work brings in a slightly different perspective in a lot of organizing spaces. And I feel like a lot of displaced Palestinians who have had to be displaced, right? Who lived through those levels of displacement, we bring something a little bit different than a lot of people who are incredibly rooted, where displacement is something that lives within them, but it's also theoretical. And for me, I just think about what are we actually doing, right? And so I think about the concept of, and I had this beautiful conversation with Ijeoma Oluwa out in Seattle, maybe like 6 months ago about this, right? And we were talking about how there are people who become activated and there are people who become radicalized. And everywhere we look, people are being activated, right? 2 years ago, so many people have become activated. But if you look at like all the people who now know the truth, what have we actually done with that truth, right? And I care about that part. And I don't care about that part necessarily of like today we have to immediately remake the world and everything has to be perfect and all of that. But I care about long term, right? What are we doing? And so thinking of people who were activated 2 years ago, are they radicalized now? Are they actively doing the actual work of actual liberation? And to your point around, you know, why isn't everyone there? This seems like such a basic thing, right? It's so simple. And also a reminder to folks of like, this isn't the first basic thing, right? Like the entirety of what's known as the US, the entirety of the global north is literally built on genocide after genocide after genocide of so many people way before Palestinians were ever the main characters in the story. And I think for a lot of people, especially in what's known as the US and what's known as Canada and Australia, the settler colonies in particular, for a person here to really understand it, then they really have to contend with their reality of being on stolen land.
That's uncomfortable.
And that's incredibly uncomfortable, but also there's a giant question of why are you here, right? And in so many spaces, we don't want to ask that question, right? Like we're worried about people's feelings and it's like, oh my God, we're gonna make people too uncomfortable. And we have to pretend as if like, we are fine, but like, in the spaces that I organize in, everyone has an answer for why are they here, right? Why are we on this stolen land, right? And the thing is though, right, like my plan was to leave a minute ago and it was indigenous people of this land who were like, no, we need your service here. We need you to do this, right? And it's not a perfect system or anything like that, but to me, I need us to be in those communities, right? We just had what's known as like Thanksgiving, right? A couple of weeks ago, last week, I don't know. The amount of friendships that I lose on Thanksgiving every single year, right? Because people want to justify that, right? And I'm like, you can't give up a single dinner. You want to tell me that you're here for my liberation, that you're here for all people's liberation. And my thing is that, like, again, I care about what are we really doing, right? And if someone comes to me and they're like, yeah, I'm actually gonna do a Friendsgiving, and they're like, oh yeah, and it's entirely with indigenous people, or we're fundraising money from other people and whatever else, right? And they're actually in relationship to the land, cool, like, but no one has ever done that. Right? Everyone's just like, yeah, no, this is the only time that we can meet together. And so we have to, and there's complexity within it, right? Of like different communities have different relationships to indigeneity here. Different communities have different relationships to being displaced here, right? And forcibly displaced. And there's nuance within that, but on a very basic level, we're not even able to have that conversation. For people to miss a single dinner, and we want to pretend as if we're all here for full liberation, right? And my thing is like, when I say that like Palestine's like an entry point, I mean that in the context of every single form of oppression, every identity, every marginalized group, that is an entryway into this work. But if that's the end of your work, then we've done nothing, right? And I say that as specifically someone with like multiple marginalized identities where, you know, we talk about things like pinkwashing and the violence of how things are weaponized against us. And also the history of like, yeah, no one's gonna throw me off of a roof. And also at the same time, some conservative Palestinians have supported book bans in schools, right? And those same book bans are now used against Palestine, right? If our work just begins and ends with a single identity or a single form of oppression, again, we'll never get there. But in the end of the day, I care about not who's activated, but who's actually radicalized. And I sit with that, and I also remind myself of, and I'll speak for myself, but I was also in a space where I didn't fully comprehend things, where I needed to do better, right? And it was different things that led me to move towards that. And I remember that where I think what's happening right now, where Palestine has become such a visible thing that, yeah, most people have interacted with it in some ways. And also the amount of people who have never interacted with it amazes me, right? More recently, I'm connected with people with like conservative community members. They don't know where Palestine is on a map. These are like Christians who do not know that Jesus was Palestinian, right? Like, but immense amounts of people, right? And I think sometimes we think, when we think of visibility, right, if we assume every single person has gotten the message and they are actively ignoring it, and a lot are, I'm not saying not everyone. Just because you got the message does not mean you're not ignoring it. But if we assume that everyone got it, then we also give up hope that more people are going to be radicalized in the future, that more people are going to move towards that. And I think about that, and also the injustice of me having to be the one to hold that hope for people still really early on their journeys, when I'm like, no, actually there's a bunch of other people that should be doing that, right? Go talk to your people, go talk to the people closest to you, desettle, right? Like, do that work. And we don't always find people doing that work necessarily. And that's that gap between that activation versus that radicalization. And I think in particular within Christian dominant societies in the global north, there's this, like, the focus is on being a good person. That's what matters most. And if you're a good person, then you're fine. But being a bad person, the level of shame, people cannot process that. And so people around me will be like, oh yeah, like this person's a Zionist, but they're a good person, right? And I'm like, fuck you and your good person, right? Like, I don't care about goodness. I care about what are we doing, right? To me, goodness is a practice. It's how are we showing up every single day a little bit better, but in so many communities, including organizing communities, including far left communities, in every single community, this focus on being good takes over so many things. And y'all, like, good is a destination in that context. If I am a good person right now, then I'm done growing. If I'm done growing, why am I here? That's not how that works, right? We grow every single day, but that focus on being good prevents us from ever actually moving forward in those contexts. Because as long as we can say someone is good, then that's it. There's nowhere to go. And I hear people say that about like their parents and family members and about themselves, and it prevents them from actually showing up the next day and doing more. But every day we should be doing more. Not in terms of like, let's do more in terms of like qualitatively amount of time, but I mean efficiency and effectiveness. We can do so much more. We're meant to be doing so much more. When we're in relationships with land, with spirit, with everything, we're meant to do that. But here in particular, when people haven't even acknowledged that they're settlers, and we're fighting against getting rid of a single dinner, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We have a big gap, and also, we've always had big gaps. To Rabab's points of like, we are actually moving forward in a lot of ways. And it's a matter of just how do we continue doing that, right? And it's different if you look at this work as this is something that will end in 2 years, versus that this is a lifelong journey. Because if you're looking at it in 2 years, then you're just comparing 2 years and you're like, well, 2 years ago we were doing this and maybe like certain things were better, certain things were worse, but it feels like we're stuck. But if we think about 100 years ago, then you actually see some movement. And yeah, some movement is backwards.
Yeah.
But backwards isn't necessarily a bad thing. Because ultimately, everything that we do is meant to move us forward. We're meant to utilize everything. And the book talks a lot about that, of the concepts of what happens if we build a world without actually knowing how to live in a liberated world, right? And the fear that people would bring into that world, right? The reality is that we can replicate the same world again and again and again. And we do that within a lot of spaces, right? Because we're not willing to have those conversations, because we want to pretend as if we're all just good people. Or just because I'm activated, that means I have shown up and I'm done. There is no such thing as I am done. We're always moving towards this. And honestly, I don't know what life would look like. And you mentioned this of like, what life would look like if I wasn't moving towards liberation. It's a choice. And I don't want to even picture a world where I'm not making that choice. And so I choose it every single day. And it's not just today or tomorrow or the day after, it's literally every single day until I die, regardless of whether or not we are actively in a liberated world.
I was thinking about the way you're saying about good. Oh, okay. So I think, this whole thing about this country, the creation, and the ways the Calvinists started to bring in, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. This whole goodness, you're good, you're doing good, which is like a whole justification with the religion, with everything else of settler colonialism. I mean, settler colonialism moving towards capitalism, Calvinist spirit, and so on. But I was also thinking about the change, and I was thinking about the center reading the land acknowledgement. Because I know that many years ago, nobody read land acknowledgement. Not only that, if you mention it, everybody ridiculed you and said, ha ha ha. I know that a lot of the designers said, she did the cliche about land acknowledgement. Like, what's your problem with that? I mean, and then, of course, there is now, where sometimes people just do it just as a cliche. But I think I do remember, and I would say the 30, we used to say, I was telling you, the 13th Street Y. We used to call this the 13th Street Y. And I used to know that this is not a place we would come to as Palestinians or as Palestinians did. This was a place that, and if you want to go around it or something, don't go with a kafiyah, don't go with any identifying, because it was so Zionist, so hostile, so Islamophobic, that it was, this is what you were. And I saw how this space, post 9/11, 2001, I was sitting here, was such a nasty meeting. Hundreds of people wanting to not have war, but they were thinking about how these, they're all analysis from even Barbara Ehrenreich, the amazing Barbara Ehrenreich. All the people, Christopher Hitchens was one of the first. Terrible analysis, Islamophobic, racist, and so on, that came out after that period. And if you were one of the people who actually either believed differently or you were from those communities, you're sitting there and you don't know what to do with yourself. Because you don't belong, you're feeling a lot of hostility, and there is no way, I speak, but I thought about it, to stand up and say something. There is no way it would have been met, and it might have messed up the meeting. Not only that, I would have been blamed by many of my comrades that I messed up the meeting, that was going to be about peaceful things, and sort of like, after all we did for you, this whole charity thing, what you're ungrateful. I mean, this is the feelings. But then a lot of the thing I heard about, I wasn't here, what happened with Sarah Schulman and so on, and look where it is now. I mean, look what's happening today. We're actually having a reading and a discussion about Palestine right here. And it's really amazing. I mean, it's amazing to have a space for books, real books. San Francisco State University Library doesn't have books. We don't have books on the shelves. They're hidden, and then people go to the library and call. They have a call number. So students actually we don't feel books. We don't feel the material, we don't feel the paper. You don't see books, you don't see magazine, you don't see newspapers. It's just like, look at this. This is, amazing space that is there. Things have changed a lot from the time when actually one of the few organizations was ACTA. That was very involved with us. And I remember we did all these flyers in 1987 about the 20 years of 87 occupation. And we had comrades who came, but a lot, it was very hostile. And look, I feel like it's the most normal thing to be, and my feeling of it being the most normal thing is so abnormal. It's like, what are we doing here? Note it. This is something. So I think that also marks, for me to meet you, Yafa. You're not only in the queer movement, but also in the literature, in the poetry. And who brought us together? These incredible organizations that are putting all these. So I'm saying that there are some people Occupy movement, they refused to change the name to resist, to liberate. They kept saying occupy, and every time someone said, I'm not going there. Oh, you should really be patient with them. I said, why patient with them? They're all adults. They know how to change it because they want to be against Wall Street. Can't you be against Wall Street and say also liberate? Why? It has to be one or the other. And for whom is it? Who does this movement represent? And what's your goals? Oh, we're all going to be sitting here and protest. Okay, protest. What you going to build in its place? And people said, oh, this is so instrumental. Are we going to change the world? What are we going to do? We protest, but are we going to change the world? What is going to be the day tomorrow? What are we going to do tomorrow? And oh my God, people were so merciless. It's like, oh, you're so tough and you're doing this. And I mean, it's like, it is so. And I'm saying that if you compare that, San Francisco had the Intifada tent, but it still was called Occupy, by the way. And it was like really difficult to speak about that. And when before the Standing Rock, a whole bunch of people left and went and hitched their tent on the indigenous mountain. I mean, like, that's not enough. I mean, what did you learn from this? What did the indigenous people teach? What are the lessons when we talk this year? I mean, not only eating the Thanksgiving dinner, but also there were people mourning, all of it. What are you learning? Are you learning about where the bones are, where the relics that are not being returned, what the relationship? What does it really mean to have sovereignty or not sovereignty? For us, we think about that. What does this really mean? Having statehood, not having statehood, being even recognized by the settler state here. And so I think there is some things have changed and have the consciousness in the movement. There are some things that the movement at some point refused to even recognize many parts of the movement. There are some things today that there are parts of the movement that are forcing it. And it's not necessarily Palestinians who are forcing it. There are different people who are forcing it. So I think for the movement, it's moving forward. I hope that maybe in the elections, they're not going to hitch their wagon every year on 4 years and think this is what's going to be, saving us, and think about how do we change. And there is this thing and so on. But I think there is something about the context of the United States versus the context of Palestine, even Palestine within the United States, and even radical Palestine within Palestine. So we're having different radicals interacting with each other, and if different, like so many waves and so many in spaces that some of them speak to each other and some of them don't. Kind of like people speak and they're not hearing each other. They're not hearing. Like, الحمام المقطع مزاري. You're a poet. You can write about that. It's not my forte, as you say.
The next book. I agree with everything. I really appreciate that history, because I think one of the greatest sorrows that I have, at least, right, is that within our movements, but also just within our families, within a lot of things, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're cut off from generations, right? And so a lot of people my age, and I was born in 92, right? And so a lot of people my age have never even talked to somebody who's done work in the 80s, right? Or even in the 90s. Like, to a point of, like, even when I still remember this I think this was right after, like, I moved back to what's known as the US, maybe I was like 18, and I was actually just really mad at everyone who was alive during the Gulf War, because in my head I was like,
Which one?
Exactly, right? And so, because in my head I was like, not a single human did anything about the Gulf War, right? But that's because I didn't know, right? I had no idea what movements existed, right? And then over time, right, learning and understanding that, wait, like, as long as oppression has happened, movements have always existed. And I think very strategically that gets erased, right? Because if we can't ground in that history, in that growth, then we're going to be hopeless.
Yeah.
We'll never do anything. So I really appreciate that. And I feel like, should we open it up for a couple of questions? If y'all have any questions, and then
If there are any questions.
I'm happy to sign some books after. And then obviously everyone needs to buy like 20 books. Some have to be mine. They will not be allowed outside.
Speak slowly because some of us have hearing problems.
Any questions? And I can give you this mic if you can come up.
Pressure.
A lot of pressure. Yes.
People always at the beginning take time to take in.
Yeah, like that.
But, you know,
Yeah,
take
and-
it 2 minutes, but not like.
And then it's like 17 questions right after, and it's like, no, we don't have time anymore.
Or random comments.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, there's like questions, comments, concerns. I can't say we'll take it seriously, but we'd love to hear.
Thank you both for sharing and exchanging and offering your insights. Rabav, I'm curious about, through your movement history, what were different moments of Palestinian solidarity with other movements that you felt have been powerful or advanced the movement? So I know when I was younger, during the Second Intifada, and then the fight for Vieques, the freedom of Vieques, that seemed to be like a moment where there seemed to be some solidarity building between like the ND movement in the Philippines, Vieques, Native Hawaiian struggle, and Palestine, where there was a surge, and I kind of was brought into some of that politicization as a younger person. What were other moments that you've seen where you felt like there's been a surge of solidarity that helped advance the movement?
I'm not going to talk a lot of this history, I love it, but I will just, couple of things that actually before I came to the US, there is a very long history internationally. Wherever you go within the International Union of Students and Youth, everywhere else, everywhere in the world, there is always people coming together, and so Palestine or anything else did not feel odd. You come to the US, it feels odd. Palestine feels odd, the resistance to it, and then other people don't know anything. Like, how come people don't know anything about South Africa?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really weird that people don't know anything about South Africa, or they don't know about the history of Algeria and so on. I know for me, I went to, first when I came to the US, Madison, Wisconsin, and we were students, we created a student slot, was called Students for Positive Change. And the Moonies were controlling the student government. So we could not, the right-wingers were connected to a movement in South Korea, right? Really terrible. They controlled all the money in the government, in the student government. They controlled all the events. They controlled all this. We couldn't even reserve a room. And so all of us came together and we created this called Students for Positive Change. And we have buttons in all languages. And we basically won the student government, and that was right before the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. So that summer, 1982, we had a lecture every single week. We had a teacher in the largest hall of the university. And then when the Sabra and Shatila massacre took place, we had professors, anti-Zionist professors, walking out of the lectures. We had that was like in 82. The women's movement in there in Madison was doing this. I came to New York, it shocked me, and this is a story I tell a lot, because International Women's Day was coming. I came in November, so I was part of a Palestinian women's movement and men and so on. And so I was shopping around where we're going to do International Women's Day, because everywhere we do it, in Palestine, everywhere. So I'm going around, and actually, I'm saying, and they were asking us if we are feminists or nationalists. I was like, so weird. I mean, it was really weird to kind of like, who asked that question? So they rejected us, honestly. So we went and did our own event here at PS41, not long from here in New York. And we had speakers from all over the world, from everywhere, and everybody came together, and we had one of the best international Women's Day. And the other place where we had a lot of support was Midgar Evers College. And if I just say, for me, I went there, I was invited to speak. We were invited different places, and I come home, and I was going to give you a shout out. I come home, and I tell Jaime, it was really great, and there was this woman who was so nice and so wonderful, and Professor Betty Shabazz. And Jaime said, didn't you read Malcolm X? I said, yeah. Who's his wife? What's his name? I said, Hajj Malik. Oh, Hajj Malik Shabazz. I mean, because at that point, like our thought was like leftist, secular, we weren't really thinking about his name as Muslim. So I didn't really connect that this was his partner, but it was Betty Shabazz who was welcoming us. But there was so much during the 80s that we had the November 29th coalition, which was started in November 29th, 1981. And this is a very important moment that completely gets forgotten. Over 100 organizations endorsed the first and biggest demonstration in support of Palestinian rights here in the UN on November 28th, I think, not 29th, because it was Saturday, here. And I was a student in medicine, and we all came in buses, went to Chicago, and Chicago was the hub that we were like getting information. And we all came, and we protested across from the United Nations. And you see the list of the endorsers and so on, and November 29th stopped for that time. But it resumed after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And by that I had come to New York, and I started with that, another history. But there was so much, there was one word where all these organizations were together, and then you go to another place, which is quote unquote the peace movement. Okay? And then you sit in meetings and people say no, and you suggest a Palestinian speaker. And I remember after 82, we had a big demonstration in Washington for Latin America. And I was in there were a couple of African American Congress, and one suggested South Africa. We were saying from ANC, and they were saying no. And I said somebody on the Middle East, actually. I used to use Middle East at the time. And they said no. And like, you don't think there is connection with Israel in South Africa, with Central America? And they said no, and we couldn't do it. We marched in the demonstration in DC. And I remember all the biggies from the Arab world there, because there was a big conference for the Arab American university graduates in DC. They were all marching, and not a single speaker on the stage.
Wow.
Completely, not a single speaker on the stage. I don't know if it's it's not part, it's part of my history and how I learned about the queer movement, which actually Jaime is the one who kind of like gave me the books and explained them to me. And I mean, I wasn't really a homophobe necessarily, but I had the idea of like live and let live. But it's Jaime who gave me the books, and he went over them and explained them to me, and educated me about them, and took me to events, and I ended up meeting a whole bunch of amazing people who became leaders. But that's another story. But this is this is another story that I write about it. But this is where people like there were like a group, Patrice Lumumba Coalition, what is it called, the African and Latin American movement, people around WBAI, the indigenous people, you said the American Indian Treaty House there. They were all of them, everybody, the ANC, all the offices, the Vietnamese embassy, the Grenada embassy before the US, they were all of them, inside and outside of diplomats, they were all supportive. But then there was a whole world out there that has the money, the finances, the Riverside Church Center, that completely shut us out. Like, they even changed the name of the places and the times of the meetings. So we go to the meetings and we find there is no meeting. It happened yesterday. So, we can talk more about all this kind of stuff. I want to ask you.
Oh, yeah.
I want you to tell us a little bit about your life story.
little bit about my life story.
Just a little bit.
Well,
I'm interested in the Abdul Hadi aspect.
well, first off, I want multiple memoirs.
I was just
from
gonna say, are
right?
you
So, like,
working on your
Can I commission
memoir?
that?
Yeah.
I want at least like 10. Because one is not enough. Because I don't think we really talked about this. So my family, dad's side is from Jaffa, although my grandmother from my dad's side is from Gaza. And then a lot of people from Jaffa ended up moving to Gaza in 1948, but her side of the family were the opposite. They moved from Gaza to Jaffa around like 1915, 1916. 1948, obviously all of them were displaced. They moved from Jaffa to Nablus, that's where my dad was born. And then my mom's side of the family, our side of the family, hers was specifically in Jenin. And her grandfather was a resistance fighter against the British between 1917 and when he was martyred in the early 1940s. All of his male kids, except my grandfather, were killed by the British. Or in one case, one of them was killed by Zionists in Haifa around like 1943. I think a lot of times people forget that 1948 didn't just happen. It's not like a pocket of time. It's just like one day.
Yeah,
It's like
it was accidental.
right. It wasn't like one day everything changed. No, like there's 30 years of buildup. And so both sides of my family in the mid 1960s, around 1967, both sides moved to Kuwait. And so that's where my parents were raised. And so that's where they met. That's where they got married. And then the Gulf War happened. And then
1990.
1990. And then, and so that's when my older sisters were born. One was right before the war, one was in the middle of the war. And then after the war, that was when Kuwait expelled 2 million Palestinians, right? And so my parents drove a single car, right, with like their entire family and started over in Jordan. And that's where I was born. And then, and so I was born immediately after that, about 6 months after they moved to Jordan. And then we stayed there several years and then ended up moving to what's known as Arizona because my dad wanted to get his PhD. Education has been really, really important to Palestinians for generations. Like my dad's side of the family, the reason they left Nablus was because you couldn't get educated anymore, right? They had outlawed education around 1967. And so most people in the family have like at the very least a bachelor's degree. I think there's like 2 people without a master's or something out of like 100 people. It's kind of ridiculous. And then 9/11 happened a few years into that. And then a few years into that, we ended up moving to what's known as Canada because my parents thought that would be a better place. It was not. We lasted like 2 years and then moved back to Jordan. And this is where my story kind of begins beyond just the family. I ended up leaving home when I was about to turn 17, which for a lot of like Palestinian families, especially over there, that's kind of unheard of.
That's very young.
You don't move
You could
out.
leave for university, but not,
You move out of your family's home when you get married. But this is where the life I was living was slightly different than even the experiences that my own family were having. This is where within a single year, a lot of the people that I grew up with, a lot of the people that I had known were either killed or died that year due to a lot of different things. And so a lot of mental health challenges. It wasn't related to the queerness and transness. There wasn't really space for that at the time. And so I moved to northern Jordan. I was unhoused and I would go between northern Jordan and southern Syria. And then the Syrian revolution started. And that was when I was really radicalized, right? And to remember the organizing that happened in my childhood. And then got into college, went to what's known as Massachusetts. And that was where like there was that culture shock within organizing because I was used to communities of one, like death being so real, right? And so close to everyone, but also everyone actually checking in on one another, right? If someone was missing, we were trying to find them, right? And and I came to the context within like what's known as Massachusetts, and people would just disappear. And they'd be like, "What happened to them?" And they're like, "We don't know." And I'm like, "Wait, but like your best friends, what happened?" And they're like, "Oh, like people just stop showing up to things." I'm like, what do you mean? Like, where do they go? What happened? And people thought that was so weird, right? Of like, how dare you check in on people in that way? And then, you find out that people are actually just tired, but they never learn to communicate that actually they're tired and they need to step back. And in my head, again, I'm from I became an organizer in a war zone, and so in my head, everyone is dead, right? And so I'm like, if you disappear, you must be dead, or the state has taken you. It's one or the other.
You have to be accounted for.
Yeah, but then it was like, no, we're doing self-care. And I'm like, excuse me? And that was where, you brought up how you being in those meetings would have been seen as like really disruptive. And I remember early, even 2010, 2011, 2012, I couldn't go to places and say I'm Palestinian,
Yeah.
right? Like, you would be physically attacked in so many spaces, right? Or at the very least, no one would know what it is, right? And so you're either experiencing violence through erasure or violence through actual violence. And even being Muslim and things like that. And this was around the Boston Marathon bombing. And so then that was happening, but it was just, and so even just that growth. But even I remember in 2016, I started doing Islamophobia work, and I was on the board of and it was actually a Muslim organization, but the executive director at the time went to the board to file an ethics complaint against me for talking about Islamophobia because they were like, you're putting a target on us, how dare you? And so I went and started my own things, which put me on a very different path, but it was this idea of if you're in a space, you have to abide by the space. And that's still existing in a lot of ways, right? But we've also moved a lot in a lot of ways, even just in the last 10 years. And so over the years, lived in overall 10 different countries, some displacement related, some just running away from more displacement. You self-deport before you get deported is how I put it. And then a few years ago, I found myself in what's known as the Bay Area. And I feel like I've been preparing for this work my entire life and just doing it. And so when October 7th happened, it was just, you just do the work, you just show up. And I feel like that's a thing that, because so many places assume that the work happens overnight, that it's just gonna happen over 1 week or another, we're not actually talking about how, actually it's not this genocide that made me the organizer that I am. It was the previous genocides that I fought against, and the previous ones before that, and how every single genocide made me grow into who I am. And so when I work with people and I talk to them about this I'm like, I don't care about how you're showing up tomorrow. I care about how you show up to the next genocide. And I want to make sure that you show up to the next genocide, because most people will move towards burnout and never be there for the next genocide or the one after it. We haven't changed that, right? We haven't built a world where the next genocide won't happen.
Well, we haven't stopped this.
We haven't even stopped this one, right? And so to assume that we're good, that we're gonna be done next Tuesday is ridiculous. That's a little bit about my life. It gets more complicated in the details, but
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I know it's not easy to talk about.
I think the part for me is that I've been talking about my life very publicly since I was 19, out of necessity, right? Because that was when I held the first Islamophobia conference that I ran. I was 19, and I wasn't even the main leader of it or anything, but no one else wanted to talk about Islamophobia. And so I was like, all right, fine, I guess I'm talking about my life. And that was when death threats started and things like that, right? And
Where was that?
where was that? When?
Where was
Where? In what's known as Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was when I was in college, right? We hosted a Islamophobia conference and no one wanted to talk about it. And so it was like, all right, I guess we're talking about this. And then had to do the same for mental health, had to do the same for literally all kinds of topics. And it's kind of interesting for me where I've been talking about my life for so long that I feel like I have been able to explore the edges of my life through just talking about it on stage. I never came out to personal, in personal relationships, because I would just be talking about queerness and transness publicly without even knowing that I'm talking about queerness and transness. I'm like, yeah, everyone is trans. And then like over time being like, oh wait, no, like y'all are not on the same page. Oh, this is weird to you. But it was out of that necessity, right? And I think this is where, to me, it's such a severe injustice that so many of us have had to, like, we've had to give our stories as if they're worth nothing, right? Because otherwise, we're not permitted in spaces. Otherwise, we're not actually humanized. And now I don't really care about those things. Now I will weaponize everything to get money for the people I support, and even like all my books go to like community care funds. And so just from books alone, the last 2 years, I've been able to move probably over $200,000 to queer and trans communities, right? And things like that. But early on, it was just someone needs to do it. And, you know, recognizing over time that, wait, like, we don't have the infrastructure where someone's gonna have your back a lot of the time. And so then you become the person who has other people's backs when they're forced to do that. And here we are. Yeah, but thank you for that question. Yeah, thank y'all so much for being here. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just speaking. My young brother, well, 10 years younger, he's gay. For many years, he didn't acknowledge it to himself. And we're the ones that forced him to actually acknowledge it.
We acknowledge him on the beach in Puerto Rico.
Right, we forced him to acknowledge it, and I knew he was gay. I actually had some lesbian comrades come visit our apartment to let me know, is he gay? Because I think he is, and they came back to me and said, oh, he's gay. Judy Garland all over the place. Anyway, my question may be too personal, but the reason I bring on my brother is because my mother never stopped loving him as her son. But she couldn't quite accept the fact that he was gay. She couldn't quite wrap herself around it. She didn't deny, she didn't reject him, she didn't throw him out. But, for example, when we did have the family get together for Thanksgiving, everyone would come, right? My father and I, my brothers and sisters, and their husbands and wives. But my mother always said, I don't want him to bring anybody. And I used to argue with her. I said, Ma, if he has a relationship, what are you talking about? Anyway, she never quite did. So I was just wondering, and maybe I'm sorry if I'm touching.
Being too intrusive as usual.
Your family, how have they reacted to your sexual identity?
Yeah.
As a Palestinian.
It's always a fun question. And depending on the space, a lot of times I won't answer it. In this space, I will answer it because, like,
But you know, you're not only on this space, you're with the whole world.
you know, I've answered it before. They have it documented somewhere. I'm like, Google me enough, you'll find it. I think for me, I think again the way I came out, the way that I came into my own sexuality and gender identity and things like that, seems really like unique within the community, even though it's really not. We all come out in completely different ways, right? There's a whole spectrum of things. But because I never sat down with my parents and I was like, parents, do you still love me? We are queer. I feel like they were able to have some time and space to process without me having to deal with that initial reaction. So I can't tell you what the initial reaction would have been. I think with my parents in particular, and this is where I have very specific conflict with my sisters, or some of my sisters, versus my parents. Because I think with a lot of parents, right, who let's say historically would have been like homophobic and things like that, you know, like one of their worst fears is that their child is going to be queer. Their child is going to be trans, right? And it's a fear that they have, that the world has manufactured, has built into them. And I think with my parents, you know, when that's a fear that you have, but then like also the only child that's kind of taking care of you is the queer and trans one, and actually it's not the end of the world, you're like, oh, actually wait, it's not the end of the world. And with my parents in particular, they both had the same like mindset in terms of an end goal, but the way they process is very different. So they both in their heads, and they've said this to me and my sisters maybe not our entire lives, but definitely as adults. And they're like, there's nothing that you can do that's going to make us not love you. And for my dad, the way he processes things is, if that's what we're saying, why would we discuss it? Why would we fight about this?
It's not an issue.
Right, my dad is just like, well, if I say that I'm gonna love you regardless, I'm not gonna fight you over anything. It does, like, we're saying we're loving people regardless, it doesn't actually matter, nothing is relevant in that way. Regardless of whether you're straight, whether you're not, whatever. I mean, we don't like most of my sister's husbands, and so like, the family's a lot more judgmental about that. And I'm pretty sure my youngest sister is actually scared to like come out as straight. And so our dynamics
Come out as straight.
listen, it's scary to come out as straight, and that's the fear I have. My mom, on the other hand, right? My mom just loves fighting for this. She's a Scorpio, so she really likes debates. Like she just wants to debate with you, not because she cares, but she's like, it's a Tuesday. Let's debate about the world, right? Like, are things real? And learning to process things differently between the two of them, obviously, is that. But for the most part, both of them are actually really great. And I will say though, where this is also overshadowed through like the dynamics I have with my family very specifically. If y'all remember with like my story of like, I was 6 when we moved to what's known as Arizona. I was displaced before I was even born, right? When you think of that life, when you're growing up as that child, you have responsibilities as a child. And so I was grocery shopping for the entire family at 7, right? I would literally be pushing like a giant cart in Safeway, and all these white people would be like staring at me and like thinking I'm lost, and I'm literally like holding like 17 bags. To this day, I can hold a lot of bags because I had to as a child, right? Of like, I had to get groceries for a family of like 8 as a 7-year-old on my own, because my mom would drop me off somewhere and then she would go run other errands because we didn't have time, right? And because of that though, because I had so much responsibility as a child, when it taught me that like responsibility gives you power from the youngest of ages. And so my relationship with my family has never been one of like parent-child. My relationship has been like, I'm like, there's basically 3 of us here. We're making decisions together. I was not an easy child to work around, but I was a really powerful child. And I think that's what makes me such a good organizer, is I understand power dynamics so much, and I'm like, you need me to grocery shop, right? Like, that means I have a say on things. And it wasn't like I was problematic in ways, but the dynamics that we had were never like a parent-child. It wasn't, I'm able to be just a 6-year-old who gets to go and play around and things like that. I was the child taking care of a lot of other people in grocery shopping, and that never really ended. But because of that, my relationship with them was so different than most parent-child dynamics. And so, I guess because of that, it meant that like as I grew older, because of the responsibilities I had, they were more reliant on me than me being reliant on them, which is what allowed me to move out so early on, right, and be on my own and forced into that, right, but because of that, like coming out is about power, right, like violence is always about power. People having power over other people, right? And things that should never exist in those ways. But with my family, I made their reaction irrelevant in a lot of ways, because they couldn't do anything, even if they wanted to. Like, if they really wanted to become transphobic, they needed me way more than I needed them, which unfortunately for a lot of queer and trans kids, the power dynamics are the opposite. Right? You as a child are financially dependent on your parents. And so I only say that because in a different world, I don't know what would have been different. But also in a different world, ideally, we would live in a world where transphobia just doesn't exist, right? And Zionism doesn't exist, and settler colonialism doesn't exist, and so we're all able to be embraced. But because those, my dynamics with them are, even to this day, are so different, where I talk about this, where I think for trans people in particular, and queer people sometimes, you're basically taught that if your family is not homophobic or transphobic, you have to be best friends with them. Because like, that's the greatest anyone can be. And I'm like, no, I still don't like you. like you're not transphobic and we don't have that relationship. And it's not that I'm not open to it, right? It's just that we've never had the privilege to have a relationship, right? I've lived on my own longer than I lived at home in my life. Way longer, right? And even when I did live at home, I was the caretaker versus being cared for. And that's injustice, right? I don't blame my family for that. I blame Zionism, right? And homophobia and transphobia on larger scales, even though those dynamics weren't necessarily there in that moment in time. But that was the reality of it, right? Those dynamics were so different. And I think this is where, when we talk about different identities and how they intersect, right? How it is very different for like a trans Palestinian versus a trans white person potentially, right? And even a trans white person versus another trans white person, depending on class and upbringing and so many other things, our experiences are so different. And just a single thing makes it completely different. But I'm also just here for like, let's build a world where we don't have to wonder if we would experience potentially more violence from anybody around us. And so my parents are wonderful. And also I will say, like, my family is terrified of me. Most and we love that. And also I'm like, I don't know. and also my family is incredibly loving in a multitude of ways. And also the world is really, really cruel in how they turn people against one another, especially when they turn marginalized people against one another.
Yeah.
And so my relationship is great, but unfortunately, like, especially for trans people, and this applies for a lot of other groups, there isn't a single group of people on this planet that will always affirm all trans people, period. That place just does not exist right now, right? And that to me is the work, right? And so I love that my parents are great. I love that. And also, similar to what we were talking about, my expectations of my parents is really, really high. I'm like, okay, but what did you do today? Right? Okay, great, you love me, but what did you do? Right? I need you to be doing things, and we work on that, right? And we move towards that. But it's, again, it's just the levels of injustice that we have to carry all of that. And the what ifs and the uncertainties, and even when we are in a good space. Yeah, great question, but I don't know if your mom ever got there. I hope that she did. And
She has.
well, maybe she did and didn't tell anyone.
There's a lot of things she didn't tell. She was silent about.
Yeah. But thank you for that. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you to both of you for being here. I'm happy to sign some books. Wherever, yeah, we'll hand it to you.
All right, thank you so much, Yafa, Leah, and Rabab. This was really lovely.
Thank you.
And yes, books are for sale. Buy them, share them. And thank you to our online audience.